Hi, welcome. I'm Amanda McGill Johnson with Nebraska Women in STEM. So excited to be here today. 3 years ago, my partner, so I'm with Nebraska Cures, the executive director there. A little over 3 years ago, Bio Nebraska, my colleague there at the time, Schafer, and I got together during COVID. We had just seen the film Picture of Scientists and wanted to know what can we be doing to make an impact not only in the women in science, but the women in STEM in general. And so we were fortunate enough to be connected with the Center for Public Affairs Research and find funding to do a study that really launched the initiative that we've called Nebraska Women in STEM. We've had 3 conferences, all of which have sold out and grown. We have a luncheon, we have professional development. Overall, we've had over 1,300 women and some men participate in our activities. And hope that that continues to grow over the next 3 years. I don't know, hopefully let's dream big and keep going and keep growing and getting better and try to reach more women. Like, we know that is still only a fraction of the women we need to be reaching and seeing, and that there's more that we can do. We're looking at developing a women in leadership program over the next year. And so, please reach out, tell us what we can be doing. At the end of this presentation, we are leaving space for us to have discussions, either virtually or in person, about what can we be doing next, how can we support each other. For those of you, especially in academia, it's been a really rough year and there's a lot of uncertainty and funding and jobs, and that has rippled into the private sector to a certain extent as well. So we're leaving space after the presentation to do that, but for now, I'll go ahead and have Josie and Morgan come up and introduce themselves and share this revisiting of the report and where we are now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Amanda. We're excited to be here today. So Josie is here next to me. Josie's the director of the Center for Public Affairs Research. I'm the assistant director. Together we led the research team for the report 3 years ago, and we're excited to kind of revisit it ourselves. So
I'm gonna let those people in.
Cassie, you're letting people in, right? Yeah. So at the Center for Public Affairs Research, our mission is to collaboratively produce and disseminate high quality public scholarship about topics that impact the lives of Nebraskans and the region. We do this in a variety of ways. We are the state data center for the state of Nebraska, and so we work a lot with census data. Obviously, that's publicly available, so anybody can access it, but we do it all the time. So we know where to go, and we're quick, and most of our research projects start with some kind of foundation of census data, just like the Women in STEM report did several years ago. We also do a lot of community engaged research projects, and so that's what this Women in STEM report was, where we work with state agencies and nonprofits in Nebraska and the region to tell them a little bit about, or to work with them to co-design research that meets their needs. So whether that's surveys or interviews, like the Women in STEM report, program evaluations, we do a lot. I would say it's kind of like picking your favorite child when you think about picking your favorite community engaged research project, but at least for me, I can't speak for Josie, but this Women in STEM report definitely is within my top community engaged research projects that we've done at CPAR. So why listen then act, right? When we were approached by Bio Nebraska and Nebraska Cures, they really wanted to hear the lived, or by Sasha and Amanda rather, they really wanted to hear the lived experiences of women in STEM, and so they wanted qualitative work. They wanted to hear women, and they wanted that kind of data or evidence to back up everything that we already knew was true, kind of from those anecdotal stories. And so we developed the qualitative research design with the focus of looking at the barriers that women in STEM experience, but then also the recommendations or the opportunities. What can we do to improve the workplace and just in general lives for women in STEM? And so those were kind of our 2 focus areas, which we loved from a research perspective, applied research perspective, because it's not just developing research, conducting research, and then doing nothing with it. There was really a commitment to action behind this, which I think was one of our main motivators for joining the project. So we wanted just to recap a little bit kind of the key themes from the report and then go into data, what has changed in the women in STEM landscape in Nebraska, and then talk a little bit about and create room for conversation around what's next and moving forward. So these are some of the key themes that came from the report. This is a graphic right in the report. And so we heard one of our key themes was really this interest and motivation for pursuing a career in STEM among women, right? Why were they motivated to join or to enter a career in STEM in the first place? And so that brought up stories like parental socialization and educational socialization. So parents who worked in STEM or teachers who really told students, women, that they had abilities in STEM and could pursue a career that way. It also sparked conversation about particular events throughout your life that may lead you to ask the why questions and want to know more. So many women talked about family members being diagnosed with diseases and they didn't understand why that was happening and they wanted to pursue those questions and learn more. Women also talked a lot about how they persevered in STEM, and so this brought up conversations about grit and how they developed their confidence, and what coping strategies they developed over time in order to make it through these traditionally male-dominated careers. And then also the importance of mentors really became a topic at all aspects of the STEM journey for women. Going to mentors is that person that you can talk to and say, hey, this is happening to me, and the mentor can say, yep, I've been there before and I know the way out, right? So that was a really important theme. Also, talking about workplace power dynamics or power imbalances was a prevalent topic, and so this ranged everywhere from sexual harassment, overt sexual harassment and discrimination, to just a general skepticism that women experienced when male colleagues thought that they didn't have the technical skills that are necessary for a career in STEM, or were surprised that women did have those skills. And so those were some really powerful stories to hear, even reading the report this week in preparation for today. You know, as the interviewer, you can see that woman's face and hear her recounting her story. So they were sensitive topics for sure that we discussed. Another theme that came up often was the barriers in career promotion and advancement. And so, you know, a lot of women talked about this idea that initially it was cool, so to speak, to have a woman colleague, and then once women start to climb the STEM hierarchy and be in positions of power themselves, then their colleagues think, oh, maybe that's not as cool as it used to be. And so the people who were once their supporters were no longer their supporters anymore. Among all of these topics, work-life balance came up, and a lot of women said, right, there is no such thing as balance, it's really a juggling act. But just how women are carrying that mental load and the recognition of that mental load, the kind of constant sense of guilt that comes up when you're not at home doing things or not doing your research or your work. It's just a constant juggling act that women experience, which we should say is prevalent to all women in the workplace, not just women in STEM. And then finally, one topic that we weren't expecting, but that came up was the kind of unique Nebraska influences on women in STEM. So women reflected on, you know, working on the family farm when they were growing up and having kind of developing that sense of grit and hard work and determination that came with pitching in. Mom, dad, all the kids, grandparents pitched in order to do that work. And so how those life lessons kind of carried throughout their STEM journey. I will say one thing that we thought about as we were conducting the research was the women who we interviewed were the women who made it, so to speak, right? We didn't talk to women who left STEM because they couldn't overcome the systemic barriers or because they didn't have the support structure in place or didn't want to deal with the power imbalances. And so that was kind of a constant thought that we were aware of as we were conducting the research, and obviously still has relevance today. So like I mentioned, not only were we interested in hearing those stories about the barriers and the challenges that women experience, but we also wanted to know what we can do in order to make the experiences of women in STEM better for those currently in the workforce and then for those who are coming up into the STEM workforce. And so I think our research really revealed these 6 key recommendations. Greater awareness of barriers for women in STEM. And so this was just simply the recognition and the acknowledgement of the barriers that women potentially face in STEM, and kind of recognition for that mental load that we talked about. Women also were very interested in professional development opportunities. So this included trainings like for how to negotiate, mentorship skills, other ways to develop that kind of emotional intelligence in addition to the technical skills that they got in their education. Women also wanted access to professional networks so that they could build that peer community and then also find mentors who could support them in their career journey. They sought greater flexibility in the workplace, so issues like quality childcare came up, parental leave, and so different ways in which to navigate kind of that flexibility and just establish greater flexibility. This was, of course, right on the end of the COVID pandemic, and so work from home came up a lot, and women talked about how kind of a blessing and a curse that was, that they were able to do much more, but also that mental load was just heavier then because it wasn't as easy to kind of compartmentalize. Another recommendation was focusing on how we can build a STEM pipeline. A lot of women recognized that their STEM career was successful, so to speak, because they had a teacher who expressed interest in them and encouraged their interest in STEM. And so, you know, getting into the schools and working with teachers to really encourage students in STEM was a powerful way to go forward. And then finally, just advancing science literacy, right? So this recognition more broadly, like at the societal level, at the state level, that STEM is important. STEM is important for our workforce, and the more we can do to help people understand the importance of STEM and its contributions, the better this whole issue would be. So then thinking a little bit about what the impact has been from this Women in STEM report, right? This was a quote from one interviewee, and she says, "I don't want to say that the stories aren't important, but at the end of the day, if all we do is share our stories, where have we gone? Where have we progressed?" And so I think going back to our initial goals for this project, we really were committed on the research side and on kind of the sponsor side to action. I think looking back at this, as I was putting this together, I was looking at these different recommendations, and I think the Nebraska Women in STEM movement has touched on all of them for sure. And I use the word movement because what you all have done is truly amazing, and it is a movement among the state. But I look at the 3 on the left, and I think that those have just been knocked out of the park. The awareness of barriers for women in STEM, I think that's huge. The professional development opportunities, obviously the sold out conferences, but additionally, the negotiation trainings, the mentorship, service opportunities that you've partnered with UNO, We STEM with. And then the access to professional networks. I mean, the amount of people at those conferences, in addition to everybody who's registered, you know, as a woman in STEM, you know who a peer is, you know who a mentor is, and I think those names are appearing at each event, and so that's really powerful to know who you can go to when you need support. And so here's just kind of a snapshot. This is just in the past events I went through and counted. There's over 30. I'm sure Amanda has the actual stats, but so you've touched everything from the legislative, advocating, the conferences. So it's really cool to see. And then the testimonials as well on the website. So these are just speaking to the community that's been built, kind of the transformation of the STEM ecosystem in Nebraska, which is really cool. So I think it has been a movement, and it's really awesome to see the impact. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over. That's kind of a stock of what's been done and how it's gone. And Josie's going to share some data on what has changed.
Thank you, Morgan. Good morning, y'all. How are you? Morning. Yeah. You got a little out of order. Sorry. So we wanted to look at the report started with a little bit of a dive into some of the data on women in STEM. And so we wanted to look at it over time. I'm not saying that everything has changed as a result of Nebraska's Women in STEM. This is big, old, aggregated, chunky data from the United States Census Bureau. So we don't really have the opportunity to ask people, hey, have things changed for you as a result of the programming? But we have seen some positive changes in Nebraska's Women in STEM ecosystem, their pursuit of STEM. So first one is total science and engineering as the field of degree. So you're getting a degree, is it in engineering and science? We see in Nebraska that this has grown about 30%. All of this data is based on 2015. That's actually when they started reporting a lot of the census data by STEM groupings that were sort of easily able to pull out. We can go back a little farther, but it becomes a little bit harder to work with the data. So I'm going to look at everything 2015 to 2023. 2023 is the most recent available data at this level of detail from the American Community Survey. So we see nice increases there. Percent women in science and engineering field of degrees, so this is the total number. This is the percentage of all of those earning that degree that are women. We do see an increase, a little bit smaller. Increases are good though, we're gonna go with them. This is now those that go into computer engineering and science occupations. We focused on that core STEM. There are also the healthcare professions. There's a lot of growth and a lot of representation of women in STEM in the healthcare professions. So I won't focus on that today. I just wanted to stick to that core STEM. We do see growth in the number of those occupations, those pursuing STEM occupations, 41.3, and the percentage also increasing 11.9%. So of all those in STEM occupations, a little under a quarter were women in STEM in 2015, now a little over a quarter, but it's still only a quarter, right, of everyone in the STEM occupations being women. So definitely underrepresented, although growing. This is earnings in that same occupational group. And this is really interesting, and it's not totally captured here. I'll go a little bit of a deep dive into that in a minute. But median earnings in computer engineering and science occupations overall have grown. Women's median earnings have grown, but you see it's less than the overall median earnings. And women's earnings as a percentage of men has actually declined. And that's a very recent decline. When I saw that it went down, we were actually really strong at this 85.8%, and it actually climbed up closer to 88%, and post-COVID, it has taken a little bit of a dive. Okay, so as a percentage of men's earnings, we are earning about 76% of what men are earning in a STEM occupation right now. It used to be better. We used to really lead the country in this. I'll show you those here, but 11.4% decline. So everything else is moving in the right direction. We are underrepresented, but right direction, except for those earnings. Just to give you the sort of same set of numbers in a national context, how we compare. This is the percent of women in science and engineering, that field of degree. So their first major coming out just for that 25 plus group that might have graduated by now. 21.9% of women currently in that 2023 data have that STEM degree. It's not terrible in a national context. There's lots of opportunity. Certainly we see the coasts and some of those larger states. They also have more STEM occupations overall. So we might see women pursue them at a little bit higher where there is that greater density of those occupations. Women might feel that those occupations are a little more accessible. So I'm not necessarily pointing to women or even the STEM workplaces here as precluding women, but as we grow STEM overall in the state, it will be easier for women to see that as an opportunity and access that as an opportunity. This is field of degree, but certainly a relationship pretty close to our Midwest peers on that particular metric, but lots of opportunity. You remember Morgan's slide on the recommendations, we were really doing great on the professional networking side. On this side, there was that pipeline growing the number of women that do pursue STEM, this tells you there's lots of opportunity there. We're under a quarter of the women that are pursuing STEM right now. This is now that occupation, so how many women in occupations, this was something that had grown for us. We actually stand out here in the Midwest in that red at 27.2%. Now I said, again, we were just under a quarter, now we're just over a quarter, really matches up with how many women are pursuing those STEM degrees as well, right? The pipeline there, we can actually even kind of trace that pipeline and say, oh, we have a couple women falling off, they're pursuing the degree, but they're not going into the occupations, but most are. We look really strong next to our peers as compared to the last slide, right? We are higher than Iowa, we are higher than South Dakota, we are higher than Kansas. So some really good things happening for us there, but still only a quarter of STEM occupations are filled by women today in Nebraska. Then of course we do see those coasts a little bit stronger, those larger states, but larger ecosystems, it's going to be easier to jump into those occupations. And then here's that women's earning as a percent of men's in computer, math, engineering, and science occupations. That's 76%. Now this, we look really bad compared to our peers. And this is really interesting because usually when there's a lot of, when there's that density of occupations and there's women in those occupations, it's going to be more difficult to pay them less, right? When we have a lot of people pursuing it and it's a little bit more normalized, we wouldn't think that we would fall off on this metric, but we have fallen off on this metric. Like I said, it was over 85% coming into the COVID years and now has dropped below the 80%. So something happening there as it relates to earnings for women, certainly moving in the wrong direction. And then when we put it in this national context, it's actually even a little bit more shocking because we have peer states, regional states that have fewer women in these occupations, but are paying them better, while we are starting to lag on that metric. So something going on there. This data alone doesn't tell us exactly what's going on. It also can really have to do with the occupational structure, right? There are going to be some occupations that pay more. So if we look at overall median earnings, computer and math is higher than engineering, is much higher than life, physical, and social science as STEM occupation groups. So if more women are pursuing that life, physical, and social science versus the computer and math, just earnings they're different in those STEM, even in those core STEM groups. So we are going to have some women maybe making less as a result of the profession, but then when we compare to men by profession, we still clearly have a problem and the metric's going in the wrong way since it's dropping instead of getting closer. We also see several states really high on this metric, right? The 90%. It should be 100%, right? There's no difference.
Is it possible that they work in, like, maybe I'm trying to see things in a rose-colored lens perhaps.
Sure.
Is it possible into the work-life balance piece that maybe some women have negotiated situations where their pay isn't as much, but they have more flexibility?
I think that's a very good explanation, especially seeing the numbers change post-COVID, right? So that would be a clear explanation, yet we want men to have work-life balance challenges too, right? It shouldn't be just us that are giving up to be able to do it all. They should be giving up to do it all too. So if I saw all median earnings come down because everyone's working in a slightly more flexible environment or less hours or something like that, but this particular metric concerns me, sure. But yes, that's a likely explanation, and if women are okay with it, I'm okay with it, but that it's dropped and that other states are so much higher tells us that there's something happening here we need to look at. Go for it.
Is there, and I don't know if this is possible, is there a way to segment the data by like position in career? Meaning like as we grow, right? As we do our work and grow the number of women that are entering into STEM careers, they're gonna be at a lower paid position. And so you kind of diluted that
Yes.
median range just by increasing the volume of women. I'm not saying that accounts for this, but are we able to tell how much that is?
Not necessarily in this specific data set, but there are other data sets that we could do something like that, where we look at women in leadership positions. We know women are less likely to be in leadership positions, so they would
Right.
get paid. Again, we are comparing men's median to women's median, so we're trying to average on both sides, so
Yeah.
you know, yes and no, but right, there are a lot of explanations just more broadly coming out of the STEM field why women make less, and it tends to be occupational choice, it tends to be how their work-life balance choices and how much they work. But when we education, different schools, different networks, different leadership positions, right? In other research, people have controlled for all those factors, and there's still a little bit left over that seems to just be the systemic bias of women.
And part of the reason I ask that is, like, for me, I would want to understand is it more equal in an entry level position and it gets more disparate as women go up
It's a
the
really good
ladder?
question.
Or is it just from the very beginning a disparate pay?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's interesting. I do not. There are some things I'm willing to speculate about. I don't know, particularly in Nebraska. Here's what I'll say. I study occupations in the workforce more broadly. And what surprises me is that we have this stronger representation than our peers, but they're getting paid less. So, right, if we had less representation of women, I would be like, oh, they're gonna pay them less because they don't have to necessarily. But when I look at this with that last slide, I go, actually, I think there's a little bit more of that X factor than I would expect. Yeah, I think it's also fair to say earnings are not the entire reason we pursue STEM careers. There is a lot of disparity and diversion and differences in what people are doing in STEM. So, you know, like looking at it this way doesn't answer every question. I think that's really fair. But I'm still, something bothers me there.
Yeah.
And then it's going in the wrong direction, something bothers me. And that other states can hit 90%, something bothers me, right? Like when we average everything out, it should be closer. And it should be moving in the right direction. No, I know.
I agree with you. I think from what I see in my role, I see women exiting STEM because of pay disparity. It'd be great to have a data set that said, yeah, we're seeing this fallout as women are not getting the same opportunities.
And so we
from a pay
use the
perspective.
census data to talk about brain drain a lot and folks just exiting the state exiting the state, and it tends to be computer, math, engineering is that top group of folks that are exiting the state, and women exit at very similar rates to men, if not sometimes a little bit higher. So that could also create that bigger disparity over time. If the real, wow, they're making it women in the state in STEM are the ones that are leaving, that's leaving a group behind that's making less than them, and they're going to make even more in another state, and so that could also be bringing down those numbers, because we do have brain drain, and it is among that core STEM occupational group that tends to leave, that is the most educated. So that would explain some of it too. That's sort of just occurring to me as we talk through these different reasons, right? But if the leaders leave, that's lower pay women. Okay, so that is some of the data. Any other questions on the data before I bring Morgan back up for a bit of a discussion of what's next? Thank you. Was there any questions online?
No,
Okay.
Dr. Myers had just mentioned that it seems this is general for STEM occupations, but not women versus men in the same career, and so. just like that,
Absolutely, it
that
is
makes sense.
occupational groups. Dr. Myers.
So I think that's great in the sense that it's kind of gives us a little bit more context of what's happening in Nebraska. And so I'm just thinking now about like what's next, right? How are we moving forward? Amanda's talking about the next 3 years, and hopefully the next 3 years after that. And so when we think about recent events and emerging trends affecting the STEM workforce nationally in Nebraska, right? I think it really highlights the renewed urgency for this work. And so whether it's nationally, what has been happening in the federal funding environment, or just a general net bias now against gender education, gender equity, inclusivity education programs, we see that we really need to, I think, recommit and advocate for this work. Speaking, personally, we have CPAR has had a NSF Advanced grant terminated within the last several months, focused on gender equity in the STEM academic professions. We know based on the names of many of the people online that they've been experiencing some of that, those realities as well. So this article too at the top from the Wall Street Journal was talking about recent data that just came out from the Department of Labor, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that actually the gender gap for work from home is increasing, and so that men are returning to the office, but women are more likely to be working remotely. So that's kind of interesting. And then with that, comes challenges in promotion and advancement. When you're not in the office, you're not seen or thought of for the promotion or things like that. So all of those implications. This other study, we actually just saw this on LinkedIn this week. This was from the National Bureau of Economic Research and the project on workforce at Harvard, and it was talking about gender gaps in college major choice. And so just that perceived discrimination or anticipated discrimination, I think Josie even mentioned this a little bit, is having an effect. And so even when women are higher achieving in STEM, business, or economics compared to their peers, they're less likely to major in those fields because of that perceived and anticipated discrimination that they might be experiencing. And so I think that's significant, especially when we're talking higher education, but just thinking even if women or females are majoring in these fields, they're not necessarily in those occupations then. So just another study to share. And I think, right, we all, in addition to maybe the negative events that are occurring or the less support for women in STEM, we also know that women in STEM, in the STEM workforce, it drives innovation, right? That diversity in perspective really adds to the workplace. And so it's important to be focusing on this and advocating for it in order to develop that competitive workforce that we want nationally, globally, and very much so in Nebraska. I don't think it's controversial for me to say that. And so moving forward, right, I think this is a great way to have an opportunity for discussion. And as I've got my researcher lens on, I'm already hearing topics that could be future research projects. But I'm just thinking about moving forward for Nebraska Women in STEM. What are the opportunities for partnerships, for advocacy, and for new lines of inquiry and future research? And so I think all of these are gentle suggestions of ways to already build on the amazing success that you've already had. And so leveraging those statewide partnerships, I think Nebraska Women in STEM has done a great job with this, and continuing to do that to host events is very important. We talked a little bit about the STEM pipeline so far, and so to the extent that we can engage with K through 12 and higher ed institutions to focus on that STEM pipeline is really important. It's also about representation, right? I remember one interview talked about being from a rural community, and the extent of women in STEM for her was a nurse or a doctor. And so it's like opening up young girls' minds to what they can actually do in STEM, not just maybe what they've seen before. More representation is important. And then I think we're also we're a great example of a women in STEM movement. And so to the extent that we could engage with other advocacy groups for women in STEM, maybe in the region or on a national level, can just continue to amplify this success. In terms of advocacy, Amanda has already led kind of the efforts on advocacy and legislative engagement. And so really diving into some of maybe those more complex issues like we're talking about with earnings or wage or workplace strategies is really important too. We have great industry in Nebraska, or great employers who I think are committed to the movement. And so leveraging those partnerships and being strategic about how we can further some of those policies for women can be another avenue of future work. This last bullet point under advocacy, talking about STEM allies. I remember one interview we talked about, all these trainings are great, but if men aren't in the room, like how far do we get, right? And so we need to work with our male allies so that they are part of this movement as well. And so thinking creatively about how we can do that and develop a toolkit so that everybody can be involved in the Women in STEM movement is important. And then thinking about future ways to study this, we've talked about earnings at different levels in the STEM hierarchy for women already, but also I think it'd be so interesting to follow up with people who were interviewed in the original report and see, you know, what their kind of assessment is and if anything has changed. More formal studies with employers where we can focus on recruitment and retention for employee advancement, I think could be a great way to make some of these ideas further come alive. And then other ways to just think about interventions with negotiation trainings or ally trainings, ways to engage and actually measure and see the impact. So that is our extent of the impact, but I think it's been a great movement and we're so proud to have been a part of the beginning of it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. This, I love this slide. I'm like, okay. First of all, can we get the slides to share about later? Yeah, that's what I thought. We put that in the chat. A couple of initial reactions to this because I love it. I love brainstorming and where we could do better. Some of the things are like, oh, it just been on the to-do list and our capacity issues. But I think this really gives us an awesome roadmap for the next couple of years. I already mentioned we're also looking at a leadership program for women, maybe at a higher level, who are looking to dig in more in professional development than what our conference has to offer. Like while we have a leadership track there, like more of a series specifically designed for them could be really helpful. A few things that we do that came to mind that we're not good at promoting or letting women know about is that we do have a volunteer link on our website where you can share different ways you're willing to get involved. So like being on our planning committee for the conference, being willing to mentor or speak or advocate. And I'll be honest, like we don't have a lot of ongoing hands-on opportunities other than, you know, being on the conference planning committee. However, when I get a request from like the STEM Trail Center or the Summer Moral Hall for women to come in and do presentations for students or mentor a college student in their scholarship program or help with an after-school program, I use that list of volunteers who said, I'm interested in speaking or I'm interested in mentoring. And so when I get a request like that, I then send an email to all the people on that list. And we've been able to fill spots this year and really help make that connection to the K through 12 pipeline and even the college pipeline without creating our own program. So it's a connection that I need to get better about talking about that so we get more women on that list. But I think, you know, we certainly have a lot of women interested in that pipeline, how to strengthen it, and going and speaking with students or being willing to mentor a high school or college student is a way to do that, and connecting to those other existing programs is awesome. Another really simple way to help, you know, just spread the word is liking and sharing stuff on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is our most popular. We just started a Women in STEM network group. And there is just a couple weeks old. We started it around the time of the anniversary of this. But with algorithms and all the things, like and share our stuff. Our Women in STEM profiles we do every week are one of our more popular pieces. But make sure other people in your network know what's going on and how they can plug in and participate